The tragic story of the 9 Days Queen, Lady Jane Grey. Who was Lady Jane Grey? The Tudor Queen reigned for just 9 days, having been put on the English throne by her scheming father-in-law before being deposed by her power-hungry cousin and condemned to death by execution. Explore the story of how Henry VIII's grandness became an unwilling pawn of those around her, and lost her head because of it. Jane was the great-granddaughter of Henry VII through his younger daughter Mary, and was a first cousin once removed of Edward VI. She had an excellent humanist education and a reputation as one of the most learned young women of her day. In May 1553, she married Lord Guildford Dudley, a younger son of Edward's chief minister John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. In June 1553, Edward VI wrote his will, nominating Jane and her male heirs as successors to the crown, in part because his half-sister Mary was Catholic, while Jane was a committed Protestant and would support the Reformed Church of England, whose foundation Edward laid. The will removed his half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, from the line of succession on account of their illegitimacy, subverting their claims under the Third Succession Act. The 9 Days Queen experienced the swiftest rise and fall of any English monarch, but by her own admission, she didn't have any desire to wear a crown. Discover everything you need to know about Lady Jane Grey. Lady Jane Grey was the eldest daughter of Henry Grey and his wife, Frances. The traditional view is that she was born at Braidgate Park in Leicestershire in October 1537, while more recent research indicates that she was born somewhat earlier, possibly in London, sometime between May 1536 and February 1537. Frances was the elder daughter of King Henry VIII's younger sister, Mary. Jane had 2 younger sisters, Lady Catherine and Lady Mary. Through their mother, the 3 sisters were great-granddaughters of Henry VII, grandnieces of Henry VIII, and first cousins once removed of Edward VI, Mary and Elizabeth. Jane had a difficult childhood. Even for the harsher standards of the time, Frances Grey was an abusive, cruel, and domineering woman who felt that her daughter was weak and gentle and held her under a strict disciplinary regime. In 1553, the 15-year-old King Edward VI was dying of tuberculosis. Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, was dead, and John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, was ruling England in Edward's name. Edward, aided by Northumberland, was making anxious plans to stop the Catholic Mary from ever inheriting the throne. Northumberland wanted to remain in power, as mentor to a monarch who would bow to his rule. Jane seemed suited to that role. Yet she proved not to be the meek little maid he thought her to be, but a feisty, stubborn teenager, who was not afraid to stand up to him. Northumberland persuaded the Dorsets to agree to a marriage between Jane and his son, Lord Guildford Dudley. Jane resisted the marriage for some time, yet had no choice but to agree to it. The wedding went ahead, with great pomp and celebrations, and it seems that Jane did afterwards conceive some affection for Guildford, since she later described herself as a wife who loves her husband. Yet she would not agree to his being named king when the time came. It was Edward himself who, on his deathbed, drew up a new device for the succession, setting aside the claims of his bastardized half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, and leaving the crown to his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey. Yet Henry VIII's Act of Succession of 1544, leaving the throne to Edward, Mary and Elizabeth in turn, and then to the heirs of Francis Brandon, remained in force. Edward's device lacked the legal force to overturn it. After Edward died in July 1553, Jane was brought to Sune House near London and offered the crown of England. When she saw the assembled court waiting for her, she began to shake with fright. Northumberland led her to the throne and informed her, to her evident horror, that Edward had named her his heir. As everyone knelt to her, Jane fainted. When she came to, she rose to her feet and said, "The crown is not my right. It pleases me not. Mary is the rightful heir." Her protest was ignored. Northumberland, her parents and Guildford pressed her to do their will, and in the end, she gave way. But she was not at peace with herself. She wrote later, "It did not become me to accept." Jane was then brought to the Tower of London where, by custom, she would sojourn before her coronation. But her reign would prove the shortest in English history. How did Lady Jane Grey die? Jane's execution took place on the 12th of February 1554. By her own account, she was prepared to die. "My soul will find mercy with God," she wrote. On the day of her execution, She was first taken to a scaffold at the Tower of London, where she addressed the crowd. "Good people, I am come to die, by law. The fact against the Queen's Highness was unlawful, and the consenting thereunto by me, but, touching the procurement and desire thereof by me, I do wash my hands thereof in innocency before God, and the face of you, good Christian people, this day. I die a true Christian woman." The headsman tried to help her unlace her gown, but she insisted on doing it herself. He knelt, asking her forgiveness for what he must do, which she readily gave. "I pray you do it quickly," she begged, kneeling before the block. "Will you take it off before I lay me down?" she asked, meaning her head. "No, madam," he replied. Jane bound her eyes. At this point, according to the contemporary chronicle of Queen Jane and 2 years of Queen Mary, Jane groped for the block and found that it was not there. "What shall I do?" she is said to have cried in mounting panic. "Where is it?" Then someone guided her to it. The axe then descended, and one witness wrote that he had never seen so much blood. The headsman lifted Jane's head to show the crowd. "Behold the head of a traitor," he said. Jane was buried in the chancel of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, near Guildford. It has been called the saddest spot on earth.